So let me say that up front, base damage is broken. A lot of people know the value of skill damage boosts and heavy attack chance, but a lot of people underestimate the value of base damage. But if you want to maximize your damage in PvE and PvP, you need to understand how good base damage is. But no worries, in this video I will explain why base damage is so good, what are the ways to boost your base damage, and in the end we will do some comparison calculations so you actually get a feeling what is base damage doing. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is base damage and how is it being used? So when you open your character window, then you directly see your base damage. Your base damage has always a minimum and a maximum value. Okay, so when you are using a skill now, then it's using the base damage as a basis for your damage. So for example, if you use Guillotine Blade, and then you can see in your description that it deals 630% plus 88 damage. So what this means is that it deals 88 damage plus 630% of your base damage. So 6.3 times of your base damage plus 88. But of course you don't have here now one value for your base damage. You have only a min and a max value, which gives you a huge range. So if you would use your Guillotine Blade and you would crit now with the attack, then it would take you your max base damage. So in my case it would take here the 383 base damage. And then it would of course multiply it with 6.3 and then add up 88 damage. And if it's not a crit, then it would of course roll between your min and your max damage. Okay, but important here now is that this will be always the basis for all of your skill damage. On top you have then skill damage boost, heavy attack chance, bonus damage, but all of this influences our bases. And this basis is just only influenced by the base damage. And don't get me wrong here, skill damage boost and heavy attack chance are also really important. And of course stacking from everything as much as you can is really good. But skill damage boost and heavy attack chance is more or less a factor we multiply with our basis of our skill. So the 630% plus 88 is our basis. And skill damage boost and heavy attack chance is a factor we multiply this value with. So let's say we have 240 skill damage boost, which translates into a little less than 20% skill damage boost. Means we multiply our basis of our skill with 1.2. Which is of course really nice, but if we now can increase our basis of our skill, then skill damage boost has suddenly more value. Because 20% of 1000 damage is for example more than 20% of 800 damage. So how can we increase our basis? With base damage. And that's exactly the same for heavy attack chance, because that would also then just multiply all the damage by 2. So again, increasing the basis of the skill damage would increase the value of heavy attack chance. And that's the reason why base damage is so insanely broken. Okay, now we know that base damage is broken, but what is influencing our base damage? So there are a couple of things. First of all, of course, our weapon. There are some weapons that have just a higher base damage. So for example, the Karnix bow has a higher base damage than the Toublek bow. One of the reasons why a lot of people are actually going for the Karnix bow. Later on we will also calculate here what the actual difference here is. The next thing that influences base damage are base stats. Strength and Perception increases your min and your max damage, and Dexterity and Wisdom only increases your max damage. But for Dexterity and Wisdom you will always get more max damage as for Strength and Perception. That's why all items with a lot of stats just straight up give you more damage. And this is something you really shouldn't underestimate. Stacking a lot of items that give you just a lot of base stats is really heavily increasing your overall damage. So when you are serially crafting your build, always keep in mind that you want to have as much base stats as possible. And because an item gives maybe 3 stats more than another item is a reason to take an item. Okay, but the next sort of base damage are skills. So there are some skills that give additional base damage, like for example Blood Devotion. Here you are not getting any bonus damage, but all other players in your party, which is really strong. But how impactful it actually is, we will also calculate in a second. Okay, but the last source of base damage are the masteries, where you often have the possibility to get additional base damage. Okay, these are more or less all the sources you have for base damage. Okay, but now let's do some calculations and really see what kind of impact base damage actually has. Keep in mind that I'm ignoring here bonus damage. That's important to mention because it's not impacted by the base damage. It's really only impacting crossbow players. All the other classes are not really utilizing bonus damage. That's why ignoring that here is really not a big deal. Okay, so let's start here with the Blood Devotion. That's such a nice skill because it just increases the whole party base damage by 50. So let's say we have a bow staff player who gets the stuff now. So he's getting additional 50 base damage. And now let's see what is the difference in damage when he's using a skill. So for the calculation we of course need a build. I took here a build from our good guy Whelps. With one of his builds we have 174 to 360 base damage. So with a 50 damage increase we would go to 224 to 356 base damage. Let's say the player is using Judgment Lightning and for simplicity let's say he's not critting. If he's not critting, then of course he's rolling between the min and the max damage. So in our case we will take here the average base damage. So without a buff he would have an average base damage of 245. And with a buff he would have an average base damage of 295. So obviously 50 more. So Judgment Lightning deals now 740% base damage plus 302. Now with the average base damage value and the formula we can easily calculate here our damage. So without Blood Devotion we would deal 2115 damage, and with Blood Devotion we would deal 2485 damage. And that's an easy and simple 17.5% damage increase here. Of course there's now coming skill damage boost and heavy tech chance on top. But this is just a factor we multiply here our results with. And we will do that for both results, so it's really not changing the percentage damage increase here. That's why we can completely ignore that here. Okay, but understanding that like if you have a great sword and you press Blood Devotion and you're increasing the damage of your whole party by 17.5% is crazy good. Of course this is changing depending on the ability you are using, depending on what kind of weapon you are using, how much base damage you already have, and so on. So it won't be always 17.5%, but it will be for sure something around that number, and most of the time probably even more. So in PvE and dungeons every tank should always run with Blood Devotion. It's just giga broken in PvE. But even for backline tanks in PvP, which are playing with some ranged DPSs together, and this can be a really powerful ability. If you use Blood Devotion at the right time, you're not only saving your teammates because you're absorbing damage, which they usually would get, now you will also give them a crazy damage boost, which can certainly decide certain skirmishes. So Blood Devotion is really powerful, and you should always think about, can I utilize this spell in my group? Okay, now let's have a look onto the Karnix versus the Toublek bow. And let's see how important is actually the base damage increase here from the Karnix bow. Okay, so let's go back to the build here from Whelps. He has here with the Karnix a base damage from 153 to 411. For simplicity, we just change here now the Karnix bow to a Toublek bow. And then we would get a base damage of 141 to 371. This time we will use the skill Strafing. Let's do the calculation once with an average damage and once with the crit damage. So for the crit we of course take here the max damage. So each arrow deals here 120% damage of our base damage plus 35. So we take here for the Karnix 411 max damage times 1.2 plus 35 is 428. And for the Toublek bow we have 371 max damage, so we get 480 damage. So in total we have 10% more crit damage. Of course we would have here a certain crit multiplier, but again this will be for both the same and wouldn't change here the percentage difference between both. And for the average damage here for the Karnix we are getting 373 damage, and for the Toublek 342 damage. So in total we would have here a 9% damage increase with the Karnix. If you always wanted to know what is the actual difference here on the base damage on the Karnix versus the Toublek bow, it's around 9 to 10%. And of course the Toublek bow comes with the other benefits like the range, the cooldown reduction and so on. But it's always important to understand what you are actually losing for that. Okay, that's all for today. I really hope you learned something. and understood that base damage is just really important. If you want to deal a lot of damage, then you just need to focus on base damage. It will add up. So if you like the video and want to support me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see ya in the next one.